The year was 1989, on the eastern end of Long Island. It was mid-July, a nice hot summer day, a perfect one to get out on the water. My dad had a 17-foot Maco fishing boat that we affectionately called the Mighty Maco. It had a 90 horsepower outboard engine called the Tower of Power. We have a lot of nicknames for things, I guess. But anyways, she was an inline 6 with a center console that had a small bench seat out on front, just big enough to hold a cooler and keep it out of the sun. There was a small hold in the V-berth that we stored our life preservers in, along with the anchor and a rickety metal hand railing around the bow that probably could have used a few more screws to tighten it up, but it was still attached. We used to love to sit up there and hold on to it at cruising speed, screaming with laughter when our toes touched the water below. Lots of memories were made on that little boat, and lots of stories. Some stories I won't soon forget, and this is one of them. There are more, many more, but this one is the harrowing story of Plum Gut. So, good old Wild Bill, that's my dad, took my older sister, Melissa, and I out that day with one of his younger brothers, Uncle Johnny. I was 7 years old, and my sister was just about to turn 10 respectively. It was just going to be a day trip for some fishing and fun. Maybe we'd even get to go swimming at Split Rock if the tide was right and it was sticking up out of the water enough for us to jump off without getting cut up on the barnacles attached to the rocks below it. Then we'd head further out towards the Cedar Point Lighthouse for some bottom fishing near the breakwater. Fried fluke makes for a delicious meal, so we were all in good spirits and had high hopes for the day. It was going to be a good one. A few hours of fishing in the hot sun went by. The wind and tide started to change, making the conditions just about right for reeling in some big stripers out at the gut. My sister and I were by now getting bored of this spot, and were eager to feel some wind on our faces and cool off a bit as we cruised. So, off we went. We headed farther out in the Long Island Sound, towards the ocean, toward Plum Island. I'm sure some of you might have heard tell of this animal research island, owned by the government and off limits to the public, but that's another story. And Southold, the northern fork of Long Island. There, the land from the two islands comes together and squeezes all of the ocean water into the bay on an incoming tide and forms this rip of sea where the bottom goes from 300 feet deep to 30 feet in a relatively small space, creating some pretty big swells on top of the water. Mostly, bigger fishing vessels dared to fish there. The rip at Plum Gut made for some good feeding grounds for the bigger ocean-striped bass at certain times. Times like the changing of the tide on a hot mid-July day. Just like this day, just about at this time too. And if we were lucky, we could make it out there with just enough of it to reel in a few big ones before dark and still make it back to shore safely. At least, those were the intentions. The sea was calm on the way out, not glassy, but smooth with rolling waves, seemingly getting bigger and bigger as the wind picked up. We were enjoying the ride. The sun was high, it was hot out, and the spray from the bow of the boat cutting through the waves felt nice and refreshing. It was cooling off our sunburned skin. We were laughing together and trying to hold on tight for the ride. But the weather can be known to change at the drop of a dime out at the Gut. It is very unpredictable. It could be bright and sunny out one minute, and the next, dark, gray, and stormy. And that is exactly what happened to us that fateful day. Sun-filled skies quickly turned ominously gray. Suddenly it got dark, and the wind picked way up. The water quickly turned white-capped, and the waves got bigger and bigger. Our little boat was rocking in those waves as they grew, and the wind was now whipping. We were scared, my sister and I. We were ready to go home. A storm was on the horizon and seemed to be heading straight for us. It was about to hit, and hit hard. My dad knew it. After looking around and at the quickly changing sky, he looked at his brother and then down at us girls, and finally decided it was time to reel it up and head in. By now, the rain was sideways and pelting our faces. The wind had picked up and the sky went black until a bolt of lightning lit it up like a New Year's Eve celebration, making the sky look on fire and angry. We saw lightning strikes make contact with the water, which by this point very much resembled the water in a washing machine, and we were scared. We hadn't even really known the meaning of the word scared until now. Melissa and I are crouched down behind the center console with our never worn before life preservers on. In between, and holding onto my dad's and uncle's legs, who were holding onto the dashboard for dear life as our little boat steamed on, crashing through wave after wave, one immediately after the other, just crashing into us head on. We thought about the boat would surely sink, and we were going to drown out there. It felt like this went on for an eternity. We were now freezing, wet and shivering, holding on so tightly, and filled with fear of getting washed overboard with the next big wave that hit, when that is exactly what happened to me. It was cold, dark, and loud. So loud. The boat sounded like it was cracking up. It sounded like breaking, like sinking. There was water everywhere, all around me. I was constantly holding my breath and then gasping air in when there was a second lull between waves crashing into us, and there wasn't a wall of water surrounding me, threatening to drown me right there in that little boat, when, all of a sudden, I found myself weightless. Everything went quiet around me. I was turned over and around, and then it felt like I was now upside down, inside the cold, white water. I reached my little arms out for my dad, but had lost grip of his legs. I couldn't feel him anymore. I couldn't feel the warmth of him, and I was even more scared. Then, in the cold, quiet darkness, I felt my hand brush against metal amidst the icy water. It was the hand railing on the bow, and it was below me. I gripped onto it somehow with my left hand. My feet were extended up above my head in the water, almost vertically, and if I lost my grip on that rickety metal railing, I was surely a goner. I'd be washed away in a second. No longer. I'd be lost at sea, way out in the treacherous waters and the rip of Plum Gut. The next thing I knew, the water opened up around me, just enough for me to be able to take in a deep breath of air and open my eyes. It was still dark, but there, in front of my face, lit up by lightning, was a hand. It was my dad's huge hand, fingers spread wide and ready to grab with all their might. And behind his outstretched arm and hand was my dad's face, wide-eyed and panic-stricken, staring back at me with a look of pure devastation. He had left Johnny at the helm, Melissa still tucked down under him, between his legs, and now fully blocked behind the console, holding on and crying, I'm sure. Stood firmly, braced against the bench seat, with one arm outstretched and reaching for me, while still holding on to the dashboard of the center console with the other, so as to not get washed overboard with me. And just as my tiny, wet and tired fingers were about to lose grip of that railing, that rickety, old, loose and fabulous life-saving safety keeper of a railing, God bless it, he finally got a hold of some part of me, probably my lifesaver, still serving. And as my life, short as it was then, was flashing before my eyes, he yanked me right out of the water and didn't let go until I was thoroughly tucked back under his knees, holding onto him and that tiny center console and that relatively tiny boat in comparison to the surrounding seas, and yelled at us down to hold on and stay down. And I did. That might have been the first time in my life that I had actually listened and did exactly what I was told to do. Up until then. But I did exactly that. I held on, and I stayed down as best I could. I cried, and I prayed for what seemed like a very long time. We all made it back that day, safely but shaken, and we still tell that story sometimes, usually around Thanksgiving.